don't these meetings get loaded after the fact? Like they're not live streamed, you.
They are live streamed.
Oh, they
You
are.
can watch, yeah, you can watch them on YouTube. You just can't make any comments on YouTube. But the link will be on the website later to rewatch it if you need to.
You already start?
No.
And now,
All right. Welcome, everyone. It's Tuesday, July 15th. This is the Pickens County Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. Present right now, we have Suzanne, Doug, Joe, and I guess our first order of business is if we have any commissioner comments that weren't attached to the agenda. No? Okay, and then the second order of business is the election of a new chair and vice chair. I'm not sure how that, what the order of business, yeah.
Well, you have a quorum. It's
Yep.
been talked about. I called Zach and gave him a heads up that it seemed like people were interested in nominating him and electing him, but he hadn't been present at a meeting. So
Yep.
if you can actually have a discussion, and then if somebody wants to make a motion and whatever, you can vote on chair. I guess we've been talked a lot about chair. We would also need a vice chair,
Vice chair.
somebody to be able to back you up when you're not available.
I'd like to nominate Zach to be the chair of Pickens County Planning and Zoning Commission for the future.
For like all time. Forever.
In perpetuity?
Oh, man, I don't know if I'm ready. There has to be some term limit. People willing to accept the responsibility.
Certainly support that.
All right, thank you very much. I have no problem. Remaining, I guess, and then we would need to elect a vice chair, is that correct? Or do we already have one?
You were technically the vice
Yes.
chair, so yeah, so it would be good to also elect a vice chair, so you have backup.
It seems to me.
Do we have a full slate of commissioners currently?
You're at 6.
We're
We're
supposed to be at
looking to
6.
fill the 7th seat.
And the 6 commissioners are the 3 of us
3, Joe
Joe.
Mason online, and then Joe Kraybacher and Chelsea.
and Chelsea's still on.
Chelsea is still on. Chelsea is having a baby this fall. But is planning to stay on the P and Z, but
Right.
I'm not sure swapping your chair, vice chair with
Yeah.
Chelsea probably makes sense for now. It would be helpful if somebody else is willing to step in to be the vice chair whenever Zach's not available to attend.
Doug, would you be willing?
Yes. Travel some as well, but so maybe Zach and I
Yeah.
probably.
And Joe Kraybacher's always been kind enough to step in whenever the need
It seems
arose.
like Joe Graybacher is the appropriate party, because whenever no one's here and Joe's here, he does.
Yeah.
But if he's not interested in a formalized role. I understand.
I hadn't reached out to Joe to talk about that, but
I think that he had mentioned in 2 meetings ago that he would be willing, that he was interested and would be willing, but then he's not here, and so we're starting from.
we could get through electing the chair.
Sure, yeah, we can go a
Yeah.
couple meetings without a vice, probably.
Right, and then we
Yeah.
can
I
sort
mean,
that out.
the wealth of experience that Joe brings,
Yeah,
not to mention knowledge. I think Joe would be a perfect candidate personally.
yes, I agree.
Okay, we'll
If
get
he's willing.
Yes, and I promised that he
Yeah.
suggested that he would be willing. Yeah,
All right. Well, then I guess we will push nominating a vice chair to the next meeting where we have a full quorum and everybody's here.
Actually, I see him.
Joe's coming.
Yep, there he is.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
So we'll just.
push it
delay
for like
very
a few more seconds.
Lamb's slaughter.
No,
He's like walks in and turns around. Just walks right out.
just as we called your name.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hi, Joe.
Joe,
Yes,
tell me, I think I'm right, that a couple of meetings ago, you said that you would be willing to serve as chair or.
as long as I get paid.
Turn that over. I don't have the proper name tags for them, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just curious who I was doing.
You get to be
But-
friends.
Well, your
We-
current salary.
We just nominated.
True, I'll take it. All right,
Just nominated Zach to be chair.
okay,
Would you agree to serve as vice chair?
yeah, I like vice.
Not
Make a
having,
living on it, don't you?
You still get the Secret Service protection, but
Yeah.
responsibility.
All right, well, that's good. Congratulations, Zach.
we need to vote on this.
Yeah, I think vote on both of the, maybe you could amend your motion. to,
Congratulations and condolence.
So I'd like to amend my motion to include Joe Graybacker as the vice chair for as long as he's willing and able to serve. You didn't realize it was perpetuity.
Got you just in time.
So I guess the motion has been made by Doug to elect myself as chair and Mr. Kraybacher as vice chair. And then
Do we get to vote,
I think you better, I think we have to take a vote.
even though I'm up for, I think there's a conflict, right? Me voting for.
So I second that.
Suzanne seconds it, and then do we do a roll call for that, or we good?
You could, well, we need to vote the
Yeah.
vote, so you can just,
Okay.
roll call or hands up.
All right,
or
the
whatever.
motion has been made by Doug to elect myself as chair and Mr. Kraybacher as vice chair. It was seconded by Suzanne. And I will call vote. Suzanne,
Yes.
Doug,
Yes,
Joe,
Yes. Zach?
Joe, Mason. Yep, correct.
We can't hear you.
Oh, we can't hear you, Joe.
There we go.
Yeah,
Oh, no,
Yes,
yes.
okay.
okay, and I reluctantly vote yes.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Well, now that that business is taken care of, any comments from planning staff?
I just have a quick scheduling question for you. September, your first meeting would be on the 2nd, which is the day after Labor Day. We're looking to try and schedule some work sessions on the comp plan for you all to really dive in, working towards adoption. So I was actually looking at if we could move your September meetings from the 2nd and something to the 9th and the 23rd, that we would take both of those meetings for comp plan.
It's good with me.
Okay,
I'm traveling on the 9th, but
figured
otherwise.
no matter what we do, we won't get everyone,
Yeah.
but our hope right now is I'm looking at the 9th, the 23rd. We actually have a growth management item for you on October 7th. And then the October 21st, and if we still need it, the November 4th meeting, kind of holding all of those to really get you all to the time to work through the comp plan.
What was the November date?
4th.
October is probably not good for me.
Okay. And right in there, right, there's basically August 5th, you have a caseload item, and then October 7th, right now, we have a caseload item for you, so.
Didn't you say October 7th, growth management?
Yeah, there's a growth management application.
Okay.
Okay, well, if generally that works, well, hopefully we can get enough people to participate. That's it.
Question, can I ask?
Please.
So, what'd you say in the comp plan, you expecting to get us?
So in order to work towards, before we get into adoption of the comp plan by the P and Z. What's happening next week, we're having the kickoff meetings, P and Z with the work group, the BOCC the same. Basically starting a bunch of outreach, public outreach engagement with the community that will go August and into September. We also then want the P and Z to start basically having work sessions to actually work through the chapters of the comp plan. Since in the end, you all are going to be the ones to then take it to public hearing for adoption. So those meetings, September, October into November, are intended to be those work session times to
Okay,
be able to really dive in. And meanwhile, we'll be getting, community input as well, that we'll be able to, update you on, kind of what we're hearing as well as the draft comp plan is out there for the public to start commenting on it.
Okay, and then the next big step is the code amendments?
So, yeah, so first, after we get through work sessioning, then adoption hearings. The BOCC, under state statute now, the P and Z still adopts the comp plan. BOCC will approve it after that, so there would be a hearing with the board. And then, we'll be then starting, looks at that point, like into the beginning of next year, really working on bringing forward code amendments.
Do we think that's gonna happen as one big packet, or are we gonna go through each? I mean, is it gonna be brand new, or are you thinking like it's gonna be a complete rewrite like in 2006?
I think it will touch a lot. I mean, it may not be like a full new code, but I think, there'll be chapters of it that are gonna be a full rewrite. I mean, I think the idea is kind of like 2006, we bring it through all together. With a lot of, obviously hearings with you all and then adoption hearings with the BOCC. So we haven't even really started to think through what that looks like at this point. But obviously all of the land use code amendments will have to come through you all first for recommendations. And then onto the
And
BOCC.
is it still the plan that the code amendments are gonna be initially drafted by Design Workshop and Jessica and her team, or is that gonna be?
They are contracted to help
Staff.
us with code
Yeah.
writing as well. And so, they have obviously their main folks
Right.
with Design Workshop as well as sort of, the other sub-consultants that they have on that team. Obviously staff's gonna be pretty involved too, but, needing that support to actually get it all
Right,
drafted to be able to bring forward. So yeah, there's another big step in the process.
okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. Bonnie, do we have any members of the public online right now that would like to comment?
No, we can't hear you, Bonnie.
Sorry, we have one member of the public, Courtney K online. Courtney, if you would like to raise your hand, if you have any comments, we'll give you a couple of minutes. It's *6.
I'll just say, I know Courtney's on for the RSG item,
Okay.
so probably any comments we could hold till after that. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
But I
perfect.
knew that's why she's on.
Okay, great. Well, then I guess we will move on to our land use action, RSG. Rezoning amendment to the zoning plan with Suzanne Wolf.
Okay, but you gotta get me my right, I have to share my screen, but I gotta find the right spot. Hang on. Give me a sec. I can't figure out, I got really small. Yay, sorry, okay. So we're here today to talk about the resource government RSG rezoning amendment to the zoning plan. This is, or is an amendment or rezoning action that has been directed by the BOCC. To staff to rezone lands within Pitkin County that are currently owned by the federal and state government to the RSG zone district. That includes lands, owned by the BLM, Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the Colorado State Land Board. CDOT land is excluded. Lands owned by any entities other than the federal government or state of Colorado are excluded, so any privately owned lands. And land zoned ski rec. So the ski areas are excluded since those have already, there are public lands within those, but they are already covered under the ski rec zoning. The resource government zone district, this is the full intent statement out of the land use code. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I mean, the zone district was created in 2006 when we adopted the new code. A number of master plans had recommended that there be a zone district to apply to public lands. And this was the intent that was written into that zone district. So to control the future use of lands currently owned by federal, state, or local, currently used for non-development purposes, and to avoid inappropriate development of such lands in the event they are sold, exchanged, or otherwise made available, i.e. by long-term lease for use by an entity other than the federal, state, or local government. It's intended to allow a continuation of the types of uses permitted while in federal, state, or local government ownership and control, but not an intensification or replacement of those uses by other uses of the land. Zone district is intended to allow only very low intensity resource uses on such lands. So as with our other zone district, it comes with, a use list. I think the questions come up, what about people who have a permit from the federal government for a certain use? The Horseshoe Bend Lodge up the Frying Pan is a good example. They have, a permit from the Forest Service to operate up there. That's a use allowed by federal permit. It's a special use under the RSG zone district. So we're not trying to prevent the federal government to do uses that they would otherwise permit through their own processes. But it does address what happens if lands are taken out of federal or state ownership. And then, there is the idea here that this doesn't allow for, there is no development right associated with it. There are no TDRs associated with that land. So it's still remains within that RSG zone district. This map shows the existing zoning of the properties and is just trying to show what the current zone districts are. Obviously, you can see a lot of it is rural remote. There's a big chunk of RS30, AR10, RS160, RS20, and then there's some very little tidbits of AR2, R15, and R30 that show up within those federal or state lands that are within those zone districts today, that then would be within the RSG zone district. Later on, I'll get to the other maps. I think in the packet you saw that GIS has kind of broken them into smaller chunks, so they're a little bit easier to understand and see. But so as I mentioned, RSG was adopted in the 2000 land use code, but no lands were ever zoned to RSG. It was a tool that was created knowing that it was a recommendation from some of those master plans, but then there was no implementation of that recommendation beyond the creation of the language. And I think, as I mentioned a little bit, under today's code, even without the zone district in place, there's language under growth management that speaks to the fact that governmental lands are not eligible for a growth management exemption. So in the past, when we've had land exchanges, property that has come out of federal use, it has had to go through growth management to establish a development right for that property. So that isn't, is the same as it is today, but the zoning really properly reflects the actual use and designation of those properties under federal or state ownership. I think you're all pretty familiar with Vision 2050, but I think the point here is that we've been talking a lot about the county's values, and one of them that is longstanding and continuing is rural preservation. And I think this is clearly an action, towards that, protecting those public lands, and which have a lot to do with that rural character and the areas we want to preserve. With the rezoning, it's a two-step review by the P&Z and the BOCC. It's a county initiated rezoning, so there are different statutory requirements for that. So the P&Z reviews it, makes the recommendations, certifies the zoning plan to the BOCC, And then the BOCC reviews that in 2 readings with a public hearing. There are differences in noticing, essentially, if it's a privately initiated zoning amendment versus the county. Since, as you can see, it's large swath of the county that we're rezoning, so there's certain notice requirements under state statute. I guess that procedure speaks to that a little bit more. I think most importantly, on the bottom of that slide, the criteria that are in the code that align with state statute are that the rezoning shall advance the health, safety, or welfare of the community and must be supported by either changed conditions affecting the subject parcels or the surrounding neighborhood that support the proposed rezoning or applicable Pitkin County master plans. And so then, we've said that this is advancing the welfare by aligning the zoning with the current use of those lands and to avoid that inappropriate development if they do come out of public lands. And then I'll walk through a number of these. There's a lot of support in the comp plan and various master plans, which have been adopted by the P and Z. I went through that in detail in the memo. But-
Excuse me, I just don't want you to go too far before I ask the question.
Yep.
The last slide, the last paragraph of the last slide, the criteria, does that mean the criteria, both of those are required? It has to be.
Or by either change conditions or applicable Pitkin County master plans.
But not both. Why wouldn't we require both, since the second one is. That's where the community has spoken.
I mean, that's where our analysis, for this.
It's broader to say, well, it's broader to say either. If that's your concern.
No, I'm not concerned about broader, I'm concerned about tougher.
I mean, I guess my response would be, our analysis shows that our comprehensive plan and master plan fully support this rezoning. And I
I
don't
see.
know, as you're concerned that that's.
Do we
You're
have
looking for
changed
more?
conditions? Are there changed conditions? It seems to me the second one.
Yes, we have a new president. Is that change condition? It's just the new federal government that's talking about developing these things,
Okay, that's there,
or whatever.
yeah.
But we don't need that as a criteria because it's either one or the other.
Right, because we have plenty of basis for it,
Okay.
right, in the master plans. That,
Yeah, it does. I've
Yeah.
been working on master plans in the past. I remember promising caucuses, that we're not just going through an empty process when you're going through a year's worth of meetings and putting your hearts out and telling us what you really value in this caucus. But I could argue that if it came up, and anyway, that's okay. I'll have my arguments ready.
okay. Alright, awesome. So again, all of these plans have some reference, some very specific to RSG, knowing it exists in the code. Some, Down Valley Comprehensive Plan wasn't talking about the Resource Government Zone District, but they're clearly statements that support this type of action. So again, the memo and your draft resolution provide all of those specific references. I pulled the ones that are very direct, are all listed here, the comprehensive plan, create a new forest natural resource zone district, rezone lands. Again, you go through all of these, East Aspen, Emma, Maroon Castle, Maroon Creek, Owl Creek, all have a very specific statement specific towards actually rezoning these lands. Some of those older, like Maroon Castle was a 2003 plan, establish a new zone district and rezone. We got the new zone district established in 2006. We just didn't follow through with any rezonings at that time. And I think it's good to note that there are certain master plan areas that this just doesn't affect at all. There are master plan areas that don't have any public or state lands. There's no mention in their master plans of it, but there's no reason to. Some upper Snowmass doesn't really have any specific statements. I did get a call from Jan Martin, just saying, I don't think this affects us. Do I need to say anything? And I said, well, you don't think it affects you and you're comfortable with this is, what the proposal is. So again, not every single master plan, is that specific. Again, I think the frying pan, the language I put in the memo, isn't as specific as this, but it clearly supports the idea that we're really trying to protect those public lands. And not looking for them to be used for residential development. So I feel that that support is there. So again, that's a repeat on the big map. And I'm not sure any of these maps are actually legible to you all. Even at this scale, but hopefully in your packet, they're readable, but just gets it a little bit more detailed so you can actually see some of these pieces. And then just staff is recommending that the BOCC approve the proposed rezoning amendment to the zoning plan of all of the federal and state lands with the exceptions I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting or the presentation. That's all. Happy to answer questions.
Questions for staff?
So the
Yeah.
the original map that shows what was existing, there's rural remote and RS10 and all these other zones, right?
Mhm.
AR10, RS20. Everything is now gonna be. That is the underlying zoning. Apply at all, or is the only place that the RS30, for instance, applies to that green area is the private property
Correct.
currently.
Yeah.
So it's just really cleaning up the map. The zoning map sort of.
Right, because it's different than it's not an overlay where you keep that underlying zone district and have a new overlay. Your zoning has totally changed. And again, it's just right. Again, it makes it becomes a bit of a patchwork, which is a zoning map.
So,
to some extent, but-
so this existing zoning map, the areas that are labeled RS30, I'll stick with. In green is RS30,
Mhm.
and then the areas that are outside of that, that are white, that are privately held, I guess. Have some sort of other underlying zoning,
Right,
and that's not changed.
correct. Correct. This zoning action doesn't affect any of the privately owned
Right.
lands. So right, within, say that if you're looking on the far left at that Thompson Creek area, right, probably all of that is RS30, but like along the Crystal, there
So
are
does
a variety of zone districts that.
So because it's no longer RS30, for instance, does it? If there was a piece of property that was to go from, government hands into private ownership. Does it become more difficult to get a growth? Exemption to have a development right, because it's now. The new government's resource government.
Would have to go through a zoning action similar to this.
So, but RS30 sort of says that it's a 30-acre development, right? You have the right to develop and then everything if you own 30.
It's a 30-acre zoning, but it doesn't create the development, right? The
Right.
zoning doesn't yet.
So if I own 28 acres in the RS30 today, I don't have by law the right to go and apply for a development. I still have to get a development, right? But do I have?
If your 28 acre parcel was legally created at whatever point in time as a 28 acre parcel,
Right,
if it was pre-78.
Yeah.
You have a development right because it was before growth management, so.
in the
it's
new
legally
zoning,
created.
then that development right disappears. Because it's no longer, I mean, it's.
Well, is the way I read this, you can't do residential development,
Under the RSG.
right? So if it's RS30 zone district and goes into private hands, let's say a 30-acre parcel,
Right, yeah,
right? You can't do a residence home,
period.
right? All you can do is what's
Right.
the
what is-
permitted uses in the underlying G zone district, right?
Right,
Which would be then consistent with how it's been maintained in the past. So maybe I don't know, what would be a good example of what you could do? Kind of like go and camp on it or something like that,
Yeah.
or I could go hunt on it.
grazing
But
land.
so essentially,
agricultural.
it's discouraging any property within the RSG zone district to ever change hands. Because you're not gonna have a development, right? You're not, gonna get it built, right? Because housing is not, or development is not allowed in an RS. in
Yeah, residential development.
Residential development is not allowed.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, my view of it is it's just kind of strengthening what we already have. And to avoid what's, been discussed, which is, although they're talking about, whatever, taking Colorado out of these proposals. And then in the, the one big bill, one big beautiful bill that passed, there was going to be provisions that would allow private development, at least from a federal perspective, and those were taken out of that bill. Kind of implying that, okay, you can't, I mean, obviously, the concern out west and why the Utah senator opposed that stuff was, these are our natural resources, we don't want to see them developed with a bunch of housing.
So it can, no, right, I agree, it seems that the idea is it starts strengthening our hands, so if anything that's currently federally owned transfers out, it still is not gonna have any
Right,
development rights or ability, really, it's gonna
well, and
go against the
then,
underlying zoning.
yeah, and then, so one of my questions was gonna be, well, that's, fair enough, if it's in private hands, right? But what if somebody, developer comes along and says, hey, feds or whatever, BLM, we wanna do a public-private partnership. You're gonna still be, an owner of this, and so do they have then some sort of federal preemption to be able to say, oh, well, now we can do housing on it because, BLM still owns, still has an interest in the land.
I mean, that's a good question, right? Like, in the county's position, it would be, once this rezoning happens, any future use of the property coming out of the RSG zone district and or that is included in the RSG zone district would need to pursue a rezoning action with the county in order to pursue that development. Now,
Right, and then you get into the
then
preemption
you
issues,
get
the
a
feds say,
preemption
well, wait,
argument.
we can do what we want because
Sure.
we have preemption over state law.
Sure.
Or kind
So
of,
that will, I mean, that is, that is this exception for use by federal permit. What happens if the United States government gives a special use permit for a casino up at Maroon Bells? I guess we have a huge fight on our hands and
Yeah.
that we'll undertake at the time.
Regardless of the underlying zoning.
well, and then maybe some of these agencies don't have the statutory authority to do, like in your example, a
Sure.
casino or something like that. would be
That was
another thing to
bombastic for sure.
look, to look at in terms of trying to, just preserve what we have, and the uses that we have now.
Sure, I mean, typically following a lot of those, US code type of allowed uses for federal lands and things like that, residential development would not fall into that particular use of that, whether it's Forest Service or BLM. Some of their administrative sites, whether I think some of the Forest Service admin sites and maybe BLM admin sites leave the possibility for residential development open.
Yeah, kind of like what happened down the end of Main Street.
Sure,
Right.
exactly. Those are the kind of sites that, and I know there's some criteria under the federal code. They have to be located a certain distance from urban centers and things like that, qualify as an administrative site. I don't think those are the larger overarching concerns with this
And
particular.
presumably that would be for the use of whatever agency is doing it, not for private use or something like that. I
Yeah.
suppose they could say, oh, this is our staff that we're housing there, so it's administrative purpose or whatever. But there's also still local, there's still law that, generally local land use, controls still apply. Right?
That would be
And they
the
try and make
county's
them
argument.
compatible, because it's, I guess, similar to what we deal with when we're dealing with mining activities, right? Because you have the federal mining law. And then we got state regulation, there's certain things that we can regulate, certain things that we can't regulate.
Sure,
But I think your example of the site, the one in town
Right.
where, right, I mean, they ended up carving a piece off. And, then for a developer to then subdivide and,
Right.
if that was to happen, if that was in the county and it was its own RSG. Presumably then, whoever they were selling it to would have to come through that rezoning and argue, you know, under the code, what the changed circumstances are to support a rezoning, what the appropriate zone district is, and go through growth management, et cetera, you know, whatever review process at that time.
And this gives us, as I'm reading it, a stronger statement of intention than we had before.
It certainly effectuates a statement of intention that was in the code, existed in the code already.
Mhm.
And we think about that, you know, again, my example was hyperbolic, but I suppose there, as to Suzanne's point, were there to be a location that was rezoned to RSG and then an application came in to rezone it to some other use in the future, I don't know what it could be, but I suppose there could be an appropriate spot for some kind of future use that wouldn't necessarily be objectionable. I don't know what that is, but, you know,
But it might be an example like the one at the end of Main Street.
sure,
Mhm.
exactly, like the one at the end of Main Street.
And we've seen, I mean, again, there's one east of town was a land exchange piece up by Popcorn Lane or whatever that was part of a multi-pronged land exchange. That in the end, everybody said, sure, that makes sense. It went through growth management. There's a house built there. You wouldn't, you know the difference. It was, sort of a little inholding piece that didn't make any sense to, remain in the forest. So we've seen it in the past, the process has worked, but this definitely, makes that intent much more clear.
Well, let me ask another question. Are you finished with your question?
Mhm.
Or at least that part of it? So, this is not a public hearing, right? Is the final adoption of this gonna be a public hearing or,
Yes.
okay?
Yes,
And then do we give notice to like the BLM and the Forest Service and so on, or is it just the usual kind of just, whatever, publish it in the paper and so on? Or do we have to actually go, county have to go out, put, public notice signs and all the.
Service.
Oh, Forest Service.
Forest Service, gate and BLM and from here to.
Suzanne,
With this job, that's it.
Yeah.
That's why we have a different procedure under for a county initiated zoning.
yeah, I think
Oh,
there's a two-part response. One is I think our some of our referral actions under the land use code still exist. Some of the noticing requirements under the code are waived for county rezoning actions. The home rule charter notices required for ordinances of any kind still apply. So there'll be publication in the newspaper and on the county website and in the on the county website for the BOCC ordinance to adopt or presumably
Right, the
not
final
adopt
ordinance,
if they
yeah.
want the ordinance.
Does it, would you guys typically send a notice to the BLM or the Forest Service? And if not, do you think that makes any sense to?
I've been in touch
to,
with Kevin Warner.
argue later if they come back in and say, wait, you did this, blah, 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 blah. Well, we sent you a notice and you didn't
Yeah.
show up at any of the public hearings, you didn't object to anything.
I think.
I don't know if that makes any difference or not.
I mean, I've spoken with Kevin Warner with the Forest Service, so
Yeah.
he's aware of the action. I have not been in touch with the other.
I
entity.
mean, I would imagine some of the ones like
When
the
we
Forest
send an
Service are gonna be in
official-
favor.
You would think.
Yeah.
It can either be a referral or a form of notice.
So nobody there to
My
address.
job, that's right.
And with that, I will note that I did send it out to all of the caucuses last week,
Mhm.
since as part of that referral process.
So, yeah, one of my questions is kind of what Joe had is I was wondering about whether we would ask the Forest Service and the BLM to comment on this. And if we were to, I guess, wow, who would you ask? And if that's necessary? And then, just from looking at other counties and what their public land matrix is, ours is a lot more simple than a lot of other counties that some of them have DOD land and tribal land and a lot of other things that would make this a lot harder to do. we're just BLM Forest Service, and it looks like there's two very small pieces of state owned land on the map. I was gonna ask about other like the pseudo governmental agencies that own property in Pickens County and what those, how, you know,
Well, what about Pickens County?
well,
Should
yeah,
we rezone Pick?
right?
No, that was last meeting.
Yeah. And I'm not really sure what those, you know, I was gonna see if there was anything else out there that we're missing.
Not that we know of yet.
Right.
The other governmental entities would be counties and other political subdivisions of the state
Right.
generally. Whether that be school districts or fire districts or
Yeah.
sanitation districts. Things like that. And this action does not, by design or intent or expressly, seek to rezone any of those properties. Most of those political subdivisions of the state have specific and specific statutory purposes by which they're supposed to fulfill and operate certain tasks, whether that be infrastructure for sanitation or school district use for schools. And some of the components of those involve housing to some extent, like school district owned property around the county. Certainly, some of those properties have housing on them, so.
Yeah.
We're not looking to rezone any of those properties with this action.
So could the school district then, you know, whatever, cut a deal with the government and get a piece of land and then they're exempt from going through our process and they're not subject to the zoning?
It's a good question. I mean, theoretically, they'd be
To be able to do?
open to location and extent review,
Uh-huh.
so. I hadn't thought that out too much, but I suppose there is a possibility of something like that happening.
And there's nothing we can do about it.
Probably not. Again, I suppose that there were the school district to pursue something like that, that may be an example of a less undesirable outcome, right? Like maybe if the property came out of federal ownership and it were the school district presumably thought it was in a location that would benefit, let's call it teacher housing or something like that, because it was located just up Castle Creek from the school. Theoretically, one would hope that they would exercise their discretion as their own within their own jurisdiction and political, as a political subdivision of the state, and we would defer to that decision, I suppose. And if they pursued a rezoning or not, I guess it's something we would have an opportunity to at least comment on. You all would see a location and extent review application clearly. But yeah, I hadn't thought of that, Joe. There may be some other end arounds one could think of.
I think I'm comfortable with what the planning office has proposed. And think of those kinds of what could happen and what could happen and what if somebody did it this way, as bridges that we jump off when we get there.
Jump off. Yeah,
And hope we don't have to.
yeah, I hear you. I
Wade in
mean,
the water.
there's a lot of what ifs. I think it's all great things to think about because staff clearly hasn't thought of all of them, nor could they. Some of those, yeah, some of those are battles we may have to fight when we get there. And if we get there. But this has been in the code for a long time, so I think it's good to get it actually rezoned. And then we can deal with whatever fallouts and unforeseen consequences that come from all these land use decisions we make at times.
I have another question. So CDOT is excluded. I think, you know, seems obvious why, right? Cause they're running highways and roads and stuff like that.
But those aren't residential.
But do we know what CDOT owns? Do they own other property that they could develop with residential?
So,
I've wondered that, I mean, because I was just thinking about, I know through the canyon, you know, when they did a lot of condemnations during the highway. I mean, I feel like there's some pieces of properties that they acquired through that.
But generally, CDOT was excluded because they're, you know,
It's
basically our roads.
primarily, yeah.
Building any residential, at least at this point.
Well, we just talked today about the county taking over the intercept lot.
Bush Creek, yeah.
CDOT. The CDOT have other pieces of property like them, like the intercept lot. That's your question.
Or
Should
like,
CDOT be included because CDOT's not building housing and this is all about residential construction. Whether it's employed or not, it's right, residential development.
Mhm.
I'm looking at the zoning map right now. Do we have anything currently zoned RSG out there?
No, we don't. And I guess for the CDOT, I guess maybe the question would be, are there discrete parcels that they own? Versus
Yeah,
the strip land along, you know, the highway kind of thing.
I know I can't think of any off the top of my head. And I don't even know if CDOT would have the legislative authority to, the authority of the legislature to engage in residential development, but. Again, I suppose that wouldn't preclude CDOT from transferring some discrete parcel that they had to another entity of the state to pursue some level of development, I suppose. Most of what I understand to be the CDOT property is in and around Highway 82, really.
Yeah.
You know, they condemned that area where the Kiss and Ride is out at the roundabout. Is that the Kiss and Ride?
That's what they call it.
Yeah. And they have some parcel of the intercept lot or Brush Creek Park and Ride. Is a chunk of property owned by CDOT. So that would be one example, I suppose, of the larger CDOT owned property. That isn't totally encompassed by transportation infrastructure right now.
And I don't know on those condemnation pieces, I mean, again, there's a number of them through the canyon, like what. I guess what it looked like when you come out of that condemnation action and they acquired it. Like how that
Of the
restricts it or.
Winter Gate, that CDOT, that big area there.
I do not know what that big pull-off is.
Yeah.
Just curious.
So where do we stand now?
I guess housing next to a road is probably satisfies one of the requirements, right?
Well, if I can offer a comment here, federal preemption is very, very complex. And while I think this is a good idea, I would be given comfort if we checked with council to research this a little bit and weigh in. And I'm happy to unpack that a little bit if you'd like, but the main point is preempting federal law is very, very complex. And I'd like to try to nail down, I can't really make sure, but try to better ensure that we're on the right track.
Right, haven't you been through that? To get to this point? With
I mean, I've certainly thought about it. Some of the hypotheticals that have been put out there, like what happens if the United States or one of its agencies is a co-developer on some of these properties and the property is not actually transferred or out of federal ownership, right? So then maybe you have a more applicable scenario where preemption could apply, maybe, arguably. And then maybe we have a fight on our hands about that. The scenario that I think this envisions, other than trying to match the zone district and the uses within the zone district to the existing uses within these federal lands. The intent would be that if a property came out of federal ownership and therefore preemption no longer would apply because the federal government, the United States, no longer owned the property anymore, say they sold it to Zach. Zach wouldn't be able to argue that because the United States owned it, preemption would apply because the United States no longer owned it. Zach owns it. And the default scenario, or at least a county's argument would be, once it comes out of federal ownership, it would still be zoned RSG, and to do anything beyond what is allowed in the RSG zone district, you'd need to pursue a rezoning application. Again, there's a lot of really horrible hypotheticals for that, but I don't want to foreclose the possibility that a parcel that is appropriately located that sought a rezoning for some other use in the proper location could potentially be approved for rezoning by the BOCC after getting a recommendation from this body on that.
I think that we're complicating it. I mean, if we with every rezoning or every application that came in, we spent an hour trying to figure out what's the worst thing that could happen to us in the future, we would never leave this room. You know, and we've been doing it for decades. If the worst thing that can happen is that somebody complains, at least we have our intention of protecting what we've always wanted to protect. It's been made stronger. It's been underlined. It's in bold now. And we would deal with that issue when it comes up. I don't think we have to figure out everything that could possibly happen to us.
Right, you're right, Suzanne. That's what we're trying to do here. And
I know that.
and yeah, I fully agree. That being said, there's a body of law on preemption, and I've worked in that body of law, and sometimes a word matters. And I'd be given more comfort if we didn't miss that word, if there was one that mattered. To do our best to work within decisions that have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, even fairly recently in the last couple of years. So just be given comfort that we don't miss something obvious. It's not a scenario issue because, like you said, we can't imagine all the scenarios, but we do know some things about this body of law, and we should account for the things that we do know.
And what I am assuming, that I understand fully why you might not assume the same thing, but what I assume is that that is what the planning office and the county attorney do before it comes here.
Well, and if not, my approach would be, let's move forward on, I think generally we got consensus to move forward on this, and we want Rye to take a deeper dive, before it goes to county commissioners, then do that. At least we keep the process moving.
I'd like that.
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting. Exactly.
Then I had one more question. I don't know, maybe this is just whatever. It's interesting. It's interesting being a lawyer and seeing this stuff, but I know you put in here leases, right, are included. If it goes into private property hands or if it's leased. So you have the Forest Service, they grant, whatever, 99 or 999 year ground lease. They still have their foot in the door and can say federal preemption, but anyway, I just toss that out. I think it was good that we included leases in there. We don't really define what a long-term lease is. I think under city codes in the past, it's been like for subdivision purposes, because a lot of people try to circumvent subdivision with long-term leases. you know, I think it was 30 years or something like that. That, you know, hey, that's not really a lease, that's a, you know, basically a transfer of the real estate. But I don't think we have anything in it. Do we have anything in our land use code that says a
Right.
30-year lease is a deemed subdivision or something like
I
that?
think in the subdivision definition.
Yeah, I think
there's
other
a-
definitions, but I don't think that there's a specific number of years articulated. There is a discussion about it in chapter 11. This statement is in the existing code now
Mhm.
since 2006. The subdivision definition in the code includes long-term leases. But I can't recall exactly how long. I don't think that says how long the lease would be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we
Pretty
need
easy
to
to look, but
chase it down for this.
yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think you nailed the intent of that, which is here's a 1,000-year lease for number and bells,
Right,
that kind of thing. Go dig for gold or whatever.
I like a casino.
Yeah, be a popular destination.
So Joe Mason, as I understand it, are you comfortable? Does that make you more comfortable with voting affirmatively on this if Joe Krabacher has included what he just said a minute ago in order to keep this moving forward?
Yeah, I don't want to back it up. I would just like council to look further at it before it goes to BOCC. But I think we should certainly move it forward, not delay. I think it's the right thing. Like I said, I just want to make sure we don't miss something obvious.
I understand.
Okay. Well, the chair would be open to a motion. Someone would want to make one with the resolution of the planning.
Is that any commission motion?
What's going to do is, yes, I make the motion that we approve this resolution as written by the planning commission. So that's my motion. Do you want to amend that in any way?
I would say, yeah, as drafted by planning staff, and then, you know, just I guess, recommendation that council look a little bit deeper into, whatever seems appropriate on the federal preemption.
All right. Well, Suzanne has made a motion to approve the resolution. That is before us with the RSG zoning. And Joe's requested an amendment that staff look into the items that we requested before us. Go to second. I'll second by Doug. All right. Any other further comments before we go to a vote from any of the
So
commissioners?
Zach, and I know at the beginning Bonnie had mentioned that Courtney was online.
Oh, that's
It's not a
right.
public
Yep.
hearing.
Yep.
But if you wanted to,
Bonnie, we have one member of the public that's online. Would she like to make a comment right now before we vote?
I gave her ability to promote to panelists and allow to talk. Courtney? Okay, she's rejoining as a panelist.
Okay.
Hi, Courtney.
I'm great just listening right now and thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Courtney.
We have openings on the planning and zoning commission.
Yeah. All right, well, we have a resolution before us, of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Pickens County. Approval, for the following rezoning amendment to the zoning plan. For the RSG rezoning Resource Government Zone District. A motion was made by Suzanne. And amendments were made by Joe. And Doug was the second. And we will call this to a vote. And Suzanne,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Joe Mason,
Yes,
Doug,
Yes.
and I also vote yes, so. Passes unanimously.
Thank you all.
Awesome, thank you very much.
The plan is that this will go forward to the VOCC on first reading next week.
Mhm.
And the second reading, public hearing on the 13th of August. So,
Okay, great.
sooner.
And then that was it, so. Next meeting is our special joint meeting.
Next week,
Yeah.
and actually, we've scheduled that at the Aspen Police Department.
Mhm.
Since we'll have you all plus the full work group, we figured the way they've set up the work group meetings over there, it's easier to kind of bring everybody together around a big table.
Bigger room.
So you'll meet next door, and that is at your normal time at 5 o'clock,
On the 22nd.
22nd.
And do you expect, it was stated 5 to 8, do you expect it to go?
I think
that
we're
long?
really 5 to 7. I think it's, I think we're working on that 2 hour.
I have told Bonnie that I would not be attending because I'm going to be out of town. But I think I'll attend long distance,
Okay.
attend virtually,
Join virtually. Okay.
if I can work that out.
And our plan right now is actually to push that packet out to you all tomorrow, because it will include the draft comp plan, the final white paper on the intensity studies and those actual intensity studies. So there'll be a lot of information in there, so we wanted to get it out to you a little earlier than usual, so you had time to try and wade through all that material.
Great, thank you.
And remind me, is it gonna include the discussion regarding the transition zone? Although that's not truly a zone yet.
I mean, this is all comp plan policy level,
Okay.
So,
That was just more of general discussion, I guess.
yeah,
On the vision plan.
I'm not
I've
sure.
heard from a lot of people in Woody Creek about it.
Transition zone.
They're like, are we the transition zone?
Is that written on for it? Can't see it.
I can't answer that.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yeah.
There hasn't had an opportunity to get his name in the record yet. Maybe he wants to say.
Oh, yeah, I moved to adjourn.
Second. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Jen.
thank you,
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
thank you.